Welcome back for the continuation of the fuel pump circuit testing. Alright, so we're fairly confident that the electrical side of the fuel system is working correctly. We're going to move on to the mechanical part. And so that's going to entail mainly doing a fuel pressure test. So to get set up for that, the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and disconnect the negative battery cable. Next, we're going to open the gas filler cap. That'll relieve some of the fuel pressure. Alright, next we're going to remove the bolt on the top of the fuel filter. And what I'm going to do first of all is just loosen it one turn just to get the pressure relieved, and then we'll take it off. Now, the service manual mentions using box wrenches, and actually I'm just going to use a 17mm box wrench here. Then I'm also going to use a 3/8 ratchet with a 12mm socket. So what will happen is the 17 will go on like this, and then the 12mm will fit inside of it here. And I have some paper towels around here also to catch any fuel that might spill. To do the fuel pressure test, I actually have two fuel pressure gauge sets. The first one is the ATD 5567. And it comes with several adapters and fittings, including a 6mm adapter for Honda cars. The second set is the Innova 3640. It also comes with several adapters and fittings. And I like this one because, unlike the ATD set, it has a clear hose on the relief valve for capturing fuel in a separate container. You can also borrow similar kits from your local AutoZone or O'Reilly's. My local store didn't have one in stock, so I just decided to buy my own. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hook up this hose from the ATD kit. I'm just going to screw that into the top of the fuel filter. And then I'm going to use the Innova 3640 instead of using the ATD fuel pressure gauge. So I'll just screw that on here. And make sure it's nice and tight so you don't have any fuel pressure escaping. Then down on the floor I have this container here. I'm just going to put this hose inside of that container. Alright, so now that we feel that we're pretty safe here, I'm going to go ahead and hook up the negative battery cable. Alright, so we're going to do two sets of fuel pressure tests here because I did the fuel pressure test before with the car not running. So all I did was turn the key a couple times to pressurize the system, and my results were inconclusive in my mind. So I'm going to do that first test that I just mentioned with the car not running, and then we're going to get the car running and see what kind of fuel pressure we get then. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to disconnect the vacuum hose on the fuel pressure regulator, which is right here. And I'm going to clamp that off. The service manual says you should clamp that off, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary. But I'm just going to follow what the service manual says anyway. So I have this clamp here that I'm going to use. Alright. So what I'm going to do is hop in the car and turn the key a couple times. We should see the fuel pressure come up on the gauge right over here. So pay attention to that and let's see what we get. We're expecting to have anywhere from 38 to 46 psi with the fuel pressure regulator vacuum hose disconnected. So as you saw, the fuel pressure shot up to around 40 psi, then it settled down at 34 psi. And that's because the main relay came on and then cut off after about a couple seconds. So what we're going to do is go ahead and hook up the vacuum hose once again on the fuel pressure regulator and run that test again. So I'm going to relieve the fuel pressure first. So just press on this button right here on the side. I have the hose in the container on the floor. It's back down to 0. Now this time what we should see is the fuel pressure should be somewhere between 31 and 37 with the regulator vacuum hose connected. So the readings we got were identical to our first run, and I pretty much ruled out the fuel pump as an issue. It seems to be holding pressure just fine at around 34 psi. Also, the fuel filter is fairly new, so the only other component to look at would be the fuel pressure regulator. So we're going to do a more definitive test with the car running. Alright, so one of my favorite things to do here is to take the intake off, and that's what we're going to do in order to get the car started. What we're going to do is we're going to put some starting fluid right in this throttle body here. So we need to get all this stuff off so we can get to that. So there are a bunch of 10 millimeters. I'm going to take all those off or loosen them first. So there's one here. Take that out. There's a clamp right here. That's also 10 millimeters. I'll just loosen it. I just loosened this one just to kind of give myself a little more wiggle room. So let's go ahead and loosen this one here. And in order to open the throttle body here, the butterfly in there, we're going to have to also take off this cover here. So there's 2 bolts here and here. Put those in my pocket so I don't lose them. And take this off. Set that aside. Then what's left is a bunch of clamps, and then also our air box over here. So let's go ahead and remove some clamps here. We've got this one on the top on this hose. We'll just pull that back, take this off the bracket, and then take the hose off here. That's off. We've got a hose here. Take that off. We've got a clamp down here. So we'll go ahead and take that off. Just slide it back. That's off there. We've got this clamp here we need to take off. And then this hose comes off here. Got a clamp right there. Slide that back. Pull that out. And then what we want to do is take this hose out of here. We also need to, the air box has 3 of these clips here. There's 2 there, and then 1 way down on the bottom here. Make sure those are fully undone. And then we can slide this out of here. I'm going to put this clamp in my pocket so I don't lose it too. Take that out, set that aside, and then this should just come off here. There we go. Okay, so now we're able to start the car. We're going to go ahead and repeat our test. So we're going to start with our first test, which is with the fuel pressure regulator vacuum hose disconnected. If the fuel pressure with the vacuum hose disconnected were not in the 38 to 46 psi range, you could try lightly pinching the return hose with some pliers. If the pressure still did not rise, the pressure regulator should be replaced. Also, look for the presence of raw fuel in the vacuum hose, as that would indicate a leaky fuel pressure regulator that should be replaced. As I continued to run this test, the fuel pressure regulator intermittently stopped regulating the fuel pressure. So I later replaced it with a salvage yard unit for around $5, and this didn't correct the issue. What I missed is that there was also no vacuum in the hose. To look further at the fuel pressure regulator, I went a little off script and didn't exactly follow the troubleshooting steps in the service manual here. So what I did was I took the red probe from my multimeter and back probed the black-yellow wire on the connector for the solenoid that provides vacuum to the fuel pressure regulator. Here what I'm checking for is battery voltage, which should be somewhere around 14 volts when the car is running. The black probe from my multimeter is attached to body ground. I also hooked up a vacuum gauge between the solenoid and the fuel pressure regulator to monitor the vacuum. Voltage at the solenoid was only 0.4 volts, and we confirmed there was no vacuum. I separated the solenoid's connector, and the vacuum returned just shy of normal. Normal is denoted by the green shaded area on the gauge, and is somewhere around 17 inches of mercury. Fuel pressure was also normal at 34 psi. Later you can see that battery voltage returned, vacuum was still a little bit low, and fuel pressure was normal at 34 psi. So this is a very strange issue, and I started to suspect faulty wiring or the ECU itself. One thing that finally dawned on me is that the fans were running continuously, even when the engine was cold and the climate control system was shut off.